Nothing prepares you for the sheer audacity of an entitled neighborhood tyrant. I bought a quiet lakefront lot to decompress from hunting down dangerous federal fugitives, only to find the local HOA president using my property as her personal country club. She ignored my warnings, tore down my no trespassing signs, and set up a massive weekend bash on my lawn. What Brinley didn't realize was that her little power trip was about to collide with a very angry, heavily armed U.S. Marshal. 15 years in the United States. Marshal's service teaches you to appreciate the absolute, unvarnished beauty of silence. When your daily grind involves kicking in doors, tracking high-risk violent offenders across state lines, and living on cheap diner coffee and adrenaline, peace becomes a commodity you are willing to pay top dollar for. That was exactly what led me to Oak Haven Estates, a supposedly tranquil, upscale gated community nestled against the sprawling shores of Lake Shattage in Georgia. I didn't buy a house. I bought 2.5 acres of pristine, undeveloped, heavily wooded lakefront property. It was Lot 42. It was mine. My plan was simple: spend my weekends clearing the brush myself, enjoy the solitude, and eventually build a modest, custom log cabin where I could retire in peace. I wanted to fish, read, and forget that the worst dregs of humanity existed. I dropped a significant chunk of my life savings on the deed, signed the paperwork, and took ownership of my sanctuary. My first weekend on the property, I was in a worn-out t-shirt and steel-toed boots, swinging a machete through thick blackberry brambles near the water's edge. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was perfect. Then, I heard the high-pitched whine of an electric golf cart engine. I paused, wiping sweat from my forehead, and watched as a customized, lifted golf cart with a faux chrome grille pulled onto the grassy shoulder of my lot. Out stepped Brinley Green. Even if you didn't know Brinley, you knew her type. She wore a pristine pastel tennis outfit, despite there being no tennis courts in Oak Haven, a wide-brimmed sun visor, and oversized designer sunglasses that hid half her face. She carried a thick, leather-bound clipboard clamped to her chest like a shield. She didn't walk, she marched. Excuse me, sir," she shouted, her voice cutting through the peaceful rustle of the oak leaves like a rusty chainsaw. I slowly lowered my machete and walked up the gentle slope to meet her. "Can I help you?" "I am Brinley Green, president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, extending a hand adorned with rings that looked heavy enough to act as brass knuckles. I shook it briefly. "You must be the new owner of Lot 42. Ahmed, isn't it?" "Ahmed Weaver. Nice to meet you, Brinley." She didn't return the pleasantry. Instead, her eyes darted around my property, lips pursed in extreme disapproval. "Mr. Weaver, I noticed you're doing some unauthorized clearing. Did you submit a landscaping proposal to the Architectural Review Committee?" I chuckled, genuinely thinking she was joking. "I'm chopping down invasive blackberry bushes, Brinley. I'm not exactly building the Taj Mahal." Her expression remained utterly devoid of humor. "Oak Haven has strict covenants, Mr. Weaver. Any alteration of the natural landscape, including the removal of native or non-native flora, requires a formal submission, a $200 review fee, and approval from my board. Furthermore, your vehicle—" She pointed a manicured finger at my dusty, unmarked black Chevy Tahoe parked deep in the tree line. "Commercial and utility vehicles are not permitted to be parked on vacant lots overnight." "It's not a commercial vehicle," I replied, keeping my voice even. It was a government-issued pursuit vehicle, equipped with secure comms, a reinforced chassis, and a heavy-duty lockbox bolted to the trunk containing my agency-issued M4 carbine, tactical gear, and classified case files. But I wasn't about to tell her that. In my line of work, keeping a low profile is survival 101. It's my personal SUV. "It looks industrial," she sneered, making a note on her clipboard. "And frankly, an eyesore. I'll let the brush clearing slide today since you're new, but I expect a formal proposal on my desk by Monday, and move the truck. Welcome to Oak Haven." She spun on her heel, climbed back into her golf cart, and buzzed away. I stood there taking a slow, deep breath, reminding myself that dealing with a petty suburban dictator was still marginally better than dodging bullets in a trap house. I went back to clearing my brush, firmly deciding to ignore her completely. I had read the actual deed and the local county laws until I built a permanent structure. The HOA's landscaping covenants regarding flora alteration on undeveloped lots were legally unenforceable. I knew the law. It was literally my job. For the next few weeks, I spent my time alternating between federal manhunts and quiet weekends at Low 42. Every time I returned to the lake, I noticed the small, irritating changes. A pile of yard waste dumped just inside my property line. Fresh tire tracks from a golf cart cutting across my freshly seeded grass to reach the water faster. I let it slide initially. I didn't want a war. I just wanted to fish. But then, the real trespass began. My job with the Marshal's service often required me to disappear for weeks at a time. During a particularly grueling joint task force operation, tracking a cartel lieutenant through the Florida Panhandle, I was away from Oak Haven for nearly a month. When the operation successfully concluded, and I finally drove my Tahoe back onto Lot 42, I felt a familiar knot of anger tighten in my gut. My property had been violated. Near the water's edge, a heavy wooden picnic table had been dragged onto my land. Empty wine bottles were overflowing from a cheap plastic trash can that someone had chained to one of my ancient oak trees. The worst part? A wide, muddy path had been worn directly through the expensive, specialized grass seed I had painstakingly laid down, leading straight from the neighboring cul-de-sac down to my private beachfront. Brinley Green lived at the end of that cul-de-sac. I didn't storm over to her house. That's amateur hour. I operate on evidence. The next morning I drove into town and bought 6 high-end camouflage pattern trail cameras. These weren't your standard hunting cameras. I used my agency connections to source discrete, motion-activated units with cellular uplinks, invisible infrared flash, and high-definition audio and video capabilities. I spent an entire Sunday climbing trees, strategically placing the cameras to cover every square inch of my property lines, the beachfront, and the entrance from the road. Then, I pounded 4 metal stakes into the ground at the corners of my lot and hung bold, reflective, no trespassing private property signs. It took exactly 48 hours to catch the rat in the maze. I was sitting at my desk in the Atlanta field office, reviewing a stack of warrants, when my phone buzzed with an alert. I opened the app. The live feed buffered for a second before revealing Brinley Green. She was walking her 2 massive golden retrievers right past my no trespassing sign. She paused, looked at the sign, reached up, and deliberately tore it off the stake, tossing it into the bushes. Then, she unclipped her dog's leashes and let them run wild, tearing up the soil and doing their business right where I planned to build my living room. My jaw clenched. I downloaded the video to an encrypted cloud drive. Over the next 2 weeks, my phone became a daily highlight reel of Brinley's arrogance. I watched her host a small afternoon tea party on my picnic table. I watched her husband, a meek-looking man named Richard, park his boat trailer on the edge of my lot. She was treating Lot 42 as an extension of her own backyard, a communal park she controlled by divine right. I called the local county sheriff's office. The deputy who answered was a good old boy named Greg Simmons. When I explained the situation, he sighed loudly into the receiver. "Look, Mr. Weaver, we know Brinley. She's a pain in the rear, but HOA disputes over property lines? That's a civil matter. You need to hire a land surveyor and a lawyer. We can't go arresting the HOA president for walking her dogs." "Deputy Simmons," I said, my voice dropping to that dead calm octave I usually reserve for cornered suspects. She tore down a posted sign. "That is criminal mischief. She is trespassing on private land. I have it on 4K video. If you won't enforce the law, I will secure my property by my own means. Now hold on, don't go doing anything crazy." I hung up. I didn't have time to argue with a lazy deputy. I had to fly out to Texas for a prisoner transport. While I was sitting in a cheap motel in El Paso, my phone started exploding with alerts. Ping, 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 ping. It was Thursday morning. I opened the camera feeds, expecting to see Brinley and her dogs. Instead, I saw an army. A massive, flatbed landscaping truck was parked on my grass. 6 men were offloading large, white wooden stakes, driving them deep into my soil with sledgehammers. Next came a commercial tent rental company. I watched in absolute disbelief as a crew began erecting a colossal, 70-foot white marquee tent directly in the center of my lot. They were setting up a temporary plywood dance floor. They were stringing thousands of fairy lights through my oak trees. A catering van pulled up, and workers started hauling industrial coolers and folding tables down to the beachfront. I zoomed in on one of the cameras near the entrance. Brinley was there, wearing a fluorescent yellow safety vest over her designer clothes, barking orders at the workmen, pointing a rolled-up set of blueprints like a field marshal commanding a battalion. I immediately called my neighbor on the other side of the lot, a retired school teacher named Helen. "Helen, it's Ahmed Weaver. What the hell is happening on my land?" "Oh, Ahmed, you don't know?" Helen's voice trembled slightly. "Brinley sent out an emergency HOA newsletter yesterday. She's hosting the annual Oakhaven Summer Gala. It's a massive fundraiser. She said, well, she told everyone you graciously donated your empty lot for the weekend since the community clubhouse is under renovation." "She told them I donated it?" I seethed. "Yes. She's charging $200 a ticket for entry, Ahmed. Half the neighborhood is coming. The catering alone looks like it cost a fortune. I thought it was strange you'd agreed to it, knowing how you value your privacy." "Helen, I didn't agree to a damn thing. I'm in Texas." "Oh dear Lord. What are you going to do?" I looked at my watch. It was Thursday afternoon. The party was clearly scheduled for the weekend, likely starting Friday night. "I'm going to let her build her little kingdom, Helen, and then I'm going to tear it down." I hung up, dialed my supervisor, and requested 48 hours of emergency personal leave. I booked the next flight out of El Paso to Atlanta. During the layover, I meticulously reviewed Georgia state laws regarding criminal trespass, illegal dumping, and commercial operations on residentially zoned private land without a permit. But I had an ace up my sleeve that Brinley couldn't possibly anticipate. My government-issued Chevy Tahoe was still parked on Lot 42. Bussy, it was technically a federal asset. Inside the reinforced lockbox were items classified under federal jurisdiction. By blocking my vehicle with her tents, by occupying the land surrounding it, and by planning a massive, unpermitted commercial event around a sensitive federal law enforcement vehicle, she wasn't just violating local trespass laws. She was dangerously close to interfering with a federal officer's duties and tampering with a government vehicle. Brinley Green thought she was the law in Oakhaven. She was about to find out what real authority looked like. I drove a rental car from Atlanta International Airport, arriving at Oakhaven Estates around 4 p.m. on Friday. The community gates were propped open to allow a steady stream of florists, ice delivery trucks, and DJ equipment vans to enter. I bypassed the main entrance and slipped in through the resident lane, parking my rental down the street, hidden behind a row of tall hedges. I walked the rest of the way to Lot 42. The sight of it made my blood boil, yet a cold, calculated calm washed over me. This is the mindset of the hunt. You don't get angry, you get precise. My beautiful, secluded sanctuary had been transformed into a garish, noisy carnival. The massive white tent dominated the landscape. Potted ferns that didn't belong to me were lined up along the muddy path they had destroyed my grass to make. A portable stage was set up near the water, and a DJ was currently testing massive subwoofers that rattled the teeth in my skull. Right in the middle of it all, completely blocked in by an ice truck and a stack of folding chairs, was my black Tahoe. I stepped onto my property. Several workers walked past me, carrying trays of glassware, paying me no mind. I spotted Brinley standing near the portable bar, arguing with a man in a chef's coat. She was wearing a stunning, aggressively sparkly evening gown, her hair sprayed into a rigid helmet of blonde curls. I walked straight toward her. I didn't rush. I took long, deliberate strides. "Brinley," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the bass of the DJ's sound check. She turned, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second, before her face hardened into a mask of smug superiority. She quickly dismissed the chef and turned to face me, placing her hands on her hips. "Mr. Weaver, what a surprise. I was under the impression you were out of town on business." "And I was under the impression I owned this land," I replied, stopping 3 feet from her. I looked around the massive tent. "You have exactly 1 hour to get this circus off my property." Brinley let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Oh, Ahmed, don't be dramatic. The community clubhouse had a plumbing failure. We needed a venue for the annual gala, and your lot was sitting here, utterly useless and undeveloped. The HOA board convened an emergency session and voted to invoke the community morale and emergency access clause." I stared at her. "There is no such clause that allows you to commandeer private property for a cocktail party, Brinley. Actually, our bylaws give the board broad discretion to utilize undeveloped community-adjacent land for the betterment of Oakhaven," she countered, her chin tilted up defiantly. "We are raising money for the Neighborhood Beautification Fund. You should be honored to contribute. Now, I strongly suggest you go back to wherever you came from. Guests will be arriving at 6, and you are dressed in jeans. You are ruining the aesthetic." "Brinley, listen to me very carefully," I said, taking a step closer. The air between us grew freezing cold despite the Georgia heat. "You are trespassing. You have vandalized my property. You are running an unpermitted commercial event on residential land, and most importantly, you have trapped my vehicle." I pointed to the black Tahoe. "Oh, that old, ugly truck." She waved her hand dismissively. "I told the ice vendor to park in front of it to hide it from the guests. If you want it out, you'll have to wait until Sunday afternoon when the teardown crew arrives. Or, if it really bothers you, I can have my preferred towing company drag it out of here right now at your expense." My eyes locked onto hers. The trap was set. She had just verbally threatened to illegally tow a federal law enforcement vehicle containing sensitive materials and weaponry. "You're threatening to tow my vehicle?" I asked, ensuring my body camera, a small, discreet model I had clipped to my shirt before walking over, captured audio perfectly. "I am the president of this HOA," she sneered, stepping into my personal space, her perfume smelling like cheap lavender and entitlement. "I decide what happens on this land until you have a house on it. Now leave, Ahmed, before I call the police and have you removed for harassing the host of a sanctioned community event." I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. It was the smile I usually reserved for fugitives who thought they had me outsmarted, right before I slapped the cuffs on them. "You don't need to call the police, Brinley," I said softly. "I'm already here." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my leather badge wallet. I flipped it open, letting the heavy gold star of the United States Marshal's Service catch the late afternoon sun. Brinley's eyes dropped to the badge. For a second, her brain couldn't process it. She blinked. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I am Chief Deputy Marshal Ahmed Weaver," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "That ugly truck you trapped is a federal pursuit vehicle. It contains a federally registered Class 3 firearm, encrypted government communications equipment, and classified documents pertaining to ongoing federal investigations." I watched the blood slowly drain from Brinley's face, leaving her pale and heavily powdered skin looking like chalk. "By trapping that vehicle, restricting my access to it, and threatening to tow it," I continued, ticking the points off on my fingers, "you have committed a federal offense. You are actively interfering with a federal officer. Furthermore, you are trespassing on the private residence of a federal agent, which carries enhanced penalties." I, Brinley stuttered, the clipboard in her hand trembling. "This is an HOA matter. You can't, you're making this up." "Am I?" I snapped my badge shut and pointed at the ice truck. "Move that truck, now." The driver left with the keys. He went to get more dry ice. She panicked, her authoritative facade crumbling into dust. "Then you have a very big problem, Brinley." I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct line to my task force commander in Atlanta. I kept my eyes locked on Brinley as the line rang. "Because I'm not calling the local sheriff to settle a boundary dispute. I'm calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, and a Tactical Recovery Unit to secure a compromised federal vehicle." "No, wait, Ahmed, please." She lunged forward, her manicured claws grasping at my forearm. I stepped back instantly, my voice cracking like a whip. "Do not touch a federal officer, Mrs. Green, that's assault." She froze, her hands hovering in the air, her eyes wide with a terror I usually only see in men facing 20 to life. The DJ suddenly cut the music, sensing the confrontation. The caterers stopped moving. The entire lot fell dead, silent, save for the gentle lapping of the lake water against the shore. "Guests arrive at 6? I asked, looking at my watch. "It's 4:45. Let's see who gets here first. Your country club friends or the federal cavalry." Panic is a fascinating thing to observe. When a criminal realizes they are caught, their brain usually cycles through a predictable sequence: denial, negotiation, and finally, desperate flight. Brinley Green was currently trapped somewhere between denial and negotiation, her perfectly manicured nails biting into her palms as she watched me speak into my phone. "Commander Callahan," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the trembling HOA president. "It's Weaver. I'm at my residential lot in Oak Haven Estates. I have a situation involving a compromised federal asset." "Weaver," Callahan's gravelly voice barked through the receiver. "You're supposed to be on leave. What do you mean, compromised? My agency-issued pursuit vehicle is currently blocked in and inaccessible by unauthorized personnel. They have erected a commercial tent over my property without permission, trapping the Tahoe. The local HOA president threatened to illegally tow it, and the area is currently flooded with civilian contractors. The weapons lockbox and classified case files are vulnerable." "Are you telling me a suburban book club took your truck hostage?" Callahan sounded incredulous, but I could hear the immediate shift in his tone from casual to operational. "Affirmative. The individual responsible has been identified and warned, but the vehicle remains restricted. Requesting a tactical recovery unit, local law enforcement support, and an ATF liaison, given the Class 3 firearm secured in the trunk. I need this perimeter locked down before her 200 civilian guests arrive in exactly 45 minutes. "Understood," Callahan snapped. "Do not let anyone touch that vehicle. I'm scrambling a response team from the Atlanta field office now. ETA is 30 minutes. I'll coordinate with the local sheriff to lock down the street." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Oche, Brinley was hyperventilating. Her chest heaved beneath the sparkling fabric of her evening gown. She looked around at the colossal tent, the floral arrangements, the pristine dance floor, and the caterers who had entirely stopped working to stare at us. "Ahmed, please," she whispered, her voice entirely stripped of its previous venom. "You are overreacting. This is just a misunderstanding. I will personally write you a check right now for the rental of the lot. Name your price. 5,000, 10,000. "It is not about money, Brinley," I replied, crossing my arms. "You don't buy your way out of federal tampering. You violated my property, and in doing so, you crossed a line that brings the weight of the United States government down on your head." "But the gala," she gestured wildly to the elaborate setup. "People are going to be here at 6 o'clock. The mayor is coming. The county commissioner. You are going to ruin my reputation." "You ruined it the second you decided laws didn't apply to you," I stated coldly. Suddenly, the high-pitched whine of a golf cart broke the heavy silence. Pulling onto the grass, crushing more of my expensive seed, was Richard Green. He was wearing a stark white dinner jacket, holding a martini glass, and looking incredibly pleased with himself. "Brinley, darling, the caterers up at the front gate said there's a delay with the shrimp cocktail." Richard stopped mid-sentence as he took in the scene. The silent workers, his hyperventilating wife, and me, standing tall with a badge clipped to my belt. "What on earth is going on here? Who is this man?" "Richard, do something," Brinley shrieked, running over to him and grabbing his lapels. "He's a federal agent. He's calling the FBI to arrest us over the party." Richard blinked, his martini sloshing over the rim of the glass. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon a sense of authority he clearly didn't possess. "Now see here, buddy. I don't care who you work for. We are respected members of this community. You can't just bully my wife." "Richard," I said, my voice dangerously low, "step off my property. I am a board member of this HOA, Mom. Step off my property. I took a single step forward, projecting every ounce of intimidation I had honed over 15 years of hunting fugitives. Richard swallowed hard, his bravado instantly evaporating. He threw the golf cart into reverse, backing up exactly 3 feet until his tires hit the asphalt of the cul-de-sac. "That's far enough," I said. Before Richard could formulate a response, the sound of approaching sirens wailed in the distance. The noise grew louder, echoing off the surface of Lake Shadowdge, until a white and brown county sheriff's cruiser aggressively turned onto the street, lights flashing. It skidded to a halt near Richard's golf cart. Out stepped Deputy Greg Simmons, the exact same deputy who had dismissed my phone call weeks earlier. He looked annoyed, adjusting his duty belt as he swaggered onto my lawn. "All right, what's the problem here?" Simmons asked, looking directly at Brinley. "Brinley, dispatch said there was a disturbance at the gala venue." "Greg, thank God!" Brinley rushed toward him, tears finally spilling over her heavy mascara. "This lunatic is trying to shut down the fundraiser. He's flashing a fake badge and threatening to arrest me." Simmons turned his gaze to me, putting a hand resting casually on his radio. "All right, buddy, I'm going to need to see some identification, and you're going to need to leave this sanctioned event before I cite you for public disturbance." I didn't say a word. I simply unclipped my badge wallet from my belt and flipped it open, holding it up so the late afternoon sun hit the gold star. Beside the badge was my official agency identification card. Simmons squinted. As he read the credentials, all the color drained from his face. His hand dropped away from his radio, and he suddenly stood incredibly straight. "Chief Deputy Marshal Weaver," Simmons stammered, realizing he had just threatened to arrest a senior federal agent on his own property. I didn't realize." "Deputy Simmons," I said smoothly. "We spoke on the phone. I told you I had a trespassing issue. You told me it was a civil matter." "Yes, sir." "But I didn't know you were. I mean, she said she had permission." She lied, and now she has effectively taken a federal pursuit vehicle hostage by blocking it with an ice truck and a commercial structure. I pointed toward the Tahoe hidden behind the towering walls of the tent. "My commander is sending a tactical recovery unit. Your job right now is to secure the entrance to my property and ensure no one leaves. Everyone here is a potential witness to federal tampering." "Wait, secure the perimeter?" Simmons looked terrified. "But the guests are about to arrive." Right on cue, a sleek black Mercedes sedan turned onto the cul-de-sac, followed by a Range Rover and a Lexus. The elite of Oak Haven Estates were arriving for their grand summer gala, dressed in their finest evening wear, completely oblivious to the hurricane about to make landfall on Lot 42. Simmons looked at the arriving cars, then at me, then at the weeping Brinley. "Shut the street down, deputy," I ordered. "Now." Old Simmons jogged back to his cruiser, flipping on his PA system. "Attention arriving vehicles. This area is closed. Please turn your vehicles around. The event has been canceled." "No, you can't," Brinley wailed, collapsing onto a nearby folding chair, her head in her hands. As the confused guests began rolling down their windows to argue with the deputy, a low, powerful rumble shook the asphalt, coming down the main road of the neighborhood, blowing past the confused valet attendants at the front gate, were 4 unmarked heavy-duty black SUVs. Their hidden strobe lights were flashing red and blue, cutting through the dusk. The federal cavalry had arrived. Watching federal agents execute a perimeter lockdown is like watching a highly orchestrated ballet of calculated aggression. The 4 black SUVs swarmed the cul-de-sac, completely boxing in the luxury vehicles of the arriving guests. Doors flew open before the trucks even fully stopped, and a dozen heavily armed agents wearing tactical vests, emblazoned with U.S. Marshal and ATF, spilled out onto the street. "Move back, clear the area. This is a federal crime scene," shouted the loud agent, a massive guy named Jenkins, whom I had worked with on multiple task forces. The wealthy residents of Oak Haven Estates, expecting champagne and crab cakes, were suddenly confronted by men carrying rifles and unspooling bright yellow crime scene tape. The screams of shock and outrage were immediate, but they were quickly silenced by the sheer, overwhelming presence of federal authority. Jenkins spotted me standing near the center of the tent and jogged over, his eyes sweeping the ridiculous setup. "Weaver," Jenkins nodded, a look of profound confusion crossing his face as he took in the fairy lights and the DJ booth. "Callahan wasn't kidding. You've got a real country club hostage situation here. The asset is right behind that wall of folding chairs, Jenkins." I pointed toward the trapped Tahoe. "We have an ice truck blocking the primary exit vector." Jenkins tapped his radio. "Dispatch, we need a heavy wrecker down here immediately. Priority 1 federal tow." He then turned to look at Brinley, who was currently curled into a ball on the folding chair, weeping uncontrollably, while Richard patted her shoulder uselessly. "Is that the suspect?" "That's her," I confirmed. "Brinley Green. She orchestrated the trespass, ordered the placement of the structures, and verbally threatened to tow the federal vehicle." "All right, let's process the scene." Jenkins signaled 2 agents who immediately began taking photographs of the property lines, the destroyed no trespassing signs in the bushes, and the exact positioning of the tent relative to my Tahoe. I walked over to the DJ, who was currently trying to quietly pack up his laptop while avoiding eye contact with anyone wearing a badge. "Hey," I called out. He froze. "Turn on the floodlights, all of them." The DJ frantically hit a series of switches. Instantly, the massive 70-foot marquee tent was illuminated by blinding white stadium lights, stripping away the romantic ambiance and exposing the muddy, torn-up grass and the sheer destruction of my property. Outside the yellow tape, a massive crowd had gathered. The guests, who had been turned away, were now standing on the lawns of the neighboring houses, whispering furiously and recording the scene on their smartphones. I could hear snippets of their conversations floating over the evening air. "Arrested, Brinley. Federal agents? What did she do? I paid $200 for this ticket." Brinley finally lifted her head, looking at the dozens of phones pointed in her direction. The absolute destruction of her social standing was happening in real time, broadcast to the entire neighborhood. She ruled with an iron fist. "Ahmed, I am begging you," Brinley sobbed, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face. "Tell them to leave. I'll take the tent down myself. Just please, don't humiliate me like this." "You humiliated yourself," I answered flatly. "You thought your HOA badge made you untouchable. You thought my land was yours for the taking. This isn't revenge, Brinley. This is consequence." A massive, heavy-duty tow truck, contracted by the federal government, violently backed down the cul-de-sac, its reversing alarm echoing over the water. It bypassed the luxury cars, rolled right over Brinley's prized petunia beds at the edge of the street, and backed aggressively toward the ice truck. The ice truck driver, who had just returned in a separate vehicle, tried to run forward to stop them. An ATF agent simply held up a hand and pointed to the crime scene tape. The driver wisely backed away. Within minutes, the tow operator had the ice truck hooked up. With a grinding of gears, the massive vehicle was dragged out of the way, leaving deep, ugly trenches in my soil. The path to my Chevy Tahoe was finally clear. Jenkins walked over to the Tahoe, inspecting the locks and the reinforced trunk. "Vehicle appears secure, Weaver. No visible signs of tampering on the lockbox. We're going to need to impound the immediate structures as evidence of obstruction." "Do what you have to do," I said. Jenkins turned his attention to Brinley and Richard. He pulled out a small notepad. "Ma'am, I am Special Agent Jenkins. You are currently under investigation for several federal violations," he announced, his voice carrying easily to the crowd of onlookers. Here is exactly what she was facing. 18 U.S.C. Section 1361, depredation of government property, by restricting access to a federal vehicle and putting it at risk of damage. 18 U.S.C. Section 111, assaulting, resisting, or impeding certain officers or employees by intentionally blocking a federal officer from accessing equipment necessary for duty. Criminal trespass, Georgia state law, for violating clearly posted private property boundaries. Illegal commercial operation without a permit. Running a massive ticketed event on residentially zoned land. "Are you arresting me?" Brinley gasped, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. "At this exact moment, you are being detained for questioning," Jenkins replied coldly. "You will accompany my agents to the Atlanta field office. Whether you are booked into holding tonight will depend on your cooperation and the subsequent findings of the United States Attorney." 2 agents flanked Brinley. They didn't place her in handcuffs, not yet, but they escorted her firmly by the elbows. "Richard, do something," she screamed as she was walked toward one of the black SUVs. Richard Green, the man who had confidently threatened me with his HOA board status just 30 minutes prior, took a slow step backward. He looked at the agents, looked at me, and then looked at his half-spilled martini. I'll call a lawyer, Brinley," he stammered, entirely abandoning his wife to save his own skin. As Brinley was placed into the back of the federal vehicle, the catering company supervisor approached me. He was a small, nervous man, wiping sweat from his forehead with a towel. "Sir, Mr. Weaver?" he asked hesitantly. "My company. We were just hired to do a job. Mrs. Green signed the contract saying she owned the venue. Are we going to be arrested?" I looked at the terrified caterer. "I am a hard man, but I don't punish innocent people who get caught in the crossfire of someone else's arrogance." "Pack up your equipment," I told him gently. "Take your food, take your staff, and get off my land. I'm not pressing charges against your company, but I highly suggest you sue Brinley Green for whatever she owes you, because she's not getting her deposit back from anyone." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." The caterer practically sprinted back to his staff, yelling for them to break down the kitchen immediately. I stood on my ruined lawn, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint the trees. My sanctuary was utterly destroyed. The grass was torn to shreds, heavy wooden stakes were driven into the soil, and garbage was strewn everywhere. But as I watched the federal SUV drive away, taking the tyrant of Oak Haven Estates with it, a deep sense of satisfaction settled into my bones. The battle for Lot 42 was over, but the legal bloodbath for Brinley Green was just beginning. By Sunday morning, the sprawling white marquee tent was completely gone. The commercial crews had worked through the night under the watchful, unblinking eyes of federal agents, dismantling the stage, the lighting rigs, and the plywood dance floor. What they left behind, however, was a scarred battlefield. My meticulously graded soil was deeply rutted with tire tracks. The expensive, specialized, drought-resistant grass I had seeded was nothing but a memory, trampled into a compacted sludge of mud and spilled wine. Scattered across my property were broken glass, discarded cocktail napkins, and the unmistakable scent of a massive, unpermitted party that had been violently aborted. I stood on the shoreline holding a cup of black coffee, listening to the gentle lapping of Lake Chattooge, and mentally calculating the cost of the destruction. It was substantial, but the financial cost was nothing compared to the legal avalanche currently burying Brinley Green. On Monday morning, I walked into the United States Marshal's Service Field Office in downtown Atlanta. Special Agent Jenkins was waiting for me near the bullpen, holding a thick manila folder and sporting a grim smile. "You missed a hell of a weekend, Weaver," Jenkins said, handing me the file. "I have interrogated cartel gun runners who held up better than the president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association." "Did she waive her right to counsel?" I asked, flipping open the file to see Brinley's mugshot. Without her perfect lighting, heavy makeup, and designer sunglasses, she looked exactly like what she was, an exhausted, terrified civilian who had severely miscalculated her own importance. For the first hour, yes, Jenkins chuckled. She actually tried to invoke her HOA bylaws to the federal intake officer. She demanded to speak to the manager of the FBI. When we explained to her that she was facing federal indictments for depredation of government property and impeding a federal investigation, the reality finally snapped her brain. She spent the next 12 hours crying so hard we had to call the medics to check her for dehydration. The United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, a ruthless prosecutor named Sarah Montgomery, had taken a personal interest in the case. Federal prosecutors do not like it when entitled citizens mess with government vehicles containing classified materials and heavy weaponry. They like it even less when those citizens act with arrogant impunity. Montgomery had offered Brinley a brutal plea deal to avoid federal prison. Brinley would plead guilty to one felony count of tampering with a federal asset. The terms were non-negotiable: 5 years of strictly monitored federal probation, 500 hours of community service, specifically picking up trash along the interstate in a high-visibility orange vest, and a $25,000 federal fine. Most importantly, pleading guilty to a felony meant Brinley instantly lost her right to vote, her right to own a firearm, and, much to her absolute horror, her legal eligibility to serve on any corporate or community board, including her precious HOA. She took the deal, Jenkins confirmed. And her high-priced defense attorney took one look at your 4K trail camera footage, listened to the audio of her threatening to tow a marshal's pursuit vehicle, and told her to sign the paper before Montgomery changed her mind and threw her in Leavenworth. The federal matter was resolved, but I wasn't finished. Brinley had faced the government, but now she had to face me as a private citizen. I hired Harrison Cole, a bulldog of a real estate litigator based in Buckhead who specialized in property torts and malicious trespass. I invited Harrison to Lot 42 on Tuesday afternoon. He walked the property in an expensive tailored suit and Italian loafers, sidestepping the deep mud ruts and taking hundreds of photographs with his tablet. "Ahmed, this is a massacre," Harrison said, shaking his head as he looked at the gouged bark on my ancient oak trees where the tent riggers had driven massive steel staples. We aren't just going to sue her, we are going to financially excavate her. I'm bringing in an independent arborist, a soil remediation specialist, and a commercial landscaper to draft the estimates. When the estimates came back 3 days later, even I was shocked. Because the heavy machinery and 200 sets of dancing feet had severely compacted the earth, the entire 2.5-acre lot required deep core aeration and complete regrading. The root systems of 3-century-old oaks had been severely damaged by the steel stakes, requiring expensive chemical treatments to prevent the trees from dying. Combined with the removal of the hazardous waste left behind and the replacement of my customized grass seed, the baseline property damage stood at a staggering $78,000. But Harrison didn't stop there. He tacked on punitive damages for malicious trespass, intentional infliction of property damage, and the unauthorized commercial exploitation of private land. The final lawsuit demanded $150,000 in restitution. On Thursday evening, the Oak Haven Estates HOA held an emergency closed-door board meeting at the newly repaired community clubhouse. The neighborhood was in an absolute uproar. Rumors were flying that the FBI was going to seize the entire community, that Brinley was a domestic terrorist, and that property values were about to plummet. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed open the double doors of the clubhouse meeting room just as Richard Green, sweating profusely in a wrinkled polo shirt, was banging a small wooden gavel to establish order. The room was packed with terrified board members and angry residents. "Excuse me," Richard stammered, his eyes widening as I strode down the center aisle. "Mr. Weaver, this is a closed session for board members and homeowners, in good standing only." "I am a homeowner," I replied, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I stopped at the front table and dropped a thick, legally bound stack of documents directly in front of Richard. "And I am here to serve you." The room went dead silent. What is this?" Richard asked, refusing to touch the paperwork. "That is a civil lawsuit," I announced, turning so the entire room could hear me. "Naming Brinley Green, Richard Green, and the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association as co-defendants in a massive property destruction tort. Your wife didn't just break federal law, Richard. She destroyed my land, and since she acted under the supposed authority of this board, the board is now liable for the damages." The collective gasp from the residents sucked all the oxygen out of the room. A man in the back row stood up, his face purple with rage. "You're suing the HOA. That means our community reserve funds are going to be drained. Our monthly dues will skyrocket." Take that up with your former president, I said coldly. I bought a quiet lot to build a home. You people decided to turn it into a nightclub. I expect the full $150,000, or my attorney will begin placing liens on community assets, starting with this clubhouse. I turned my back on the sputtering, panicking crowd and walked out into the cool evening air. The trap had entirely closed. The true beauty of a well-executed legal strike is watching the opposition turn on each other to survive, and the Oakhaven Estates, HOA, turned on Brinley Green with the viciousness of starving wolves. Within 48 hours of my disrupting their meeting, the HOA's corporate attorneys filed a desperate motion to dismiss the community from my lawsuit. They claimed that Brinley had gone rogue, acting entirely outside her fiduciary duties and the official scope of the board. But the real twist of the knife came from the HOA's liability insurance provider. When the board attempted to file a claim to cover my damages, the insurance adjuster took one look at Brinley's signed federal felony plea agreement and laughed them out of the room. Standard corporate liability policies unequivocally do not cover damages resulting from intentional criminal acts. Because Brinley had pleaded guilty to a federal crime in the commission of the property damage, the insurance company voided the coverage for the incident entirely. The HOA was forced to drain its emergency reserve fund to settle their portion of my lawsuit out of court, resulting in a special assessment tax levied against every single homeowner in Oakhaven Estates. Suddenly, every resident was forced to pay an extra $3,000 out of pocket to cover the damages Brinley had caused. Overnight, Brinley Green went from the undisputed queen of the neighborhood to the most despised woman in the county. She couldn't walk her dogs without neighbors screaming obscenities at her from their driveways. She couldn't go to the local grocery store without people turning their carts around to avoid her, and she was financially drowning. To pay the $25,000 federal fine, the massive legal fees for her defense attorney, and the bulk of my civil restitution, Brinley and Richard had no choice but to liquidate. First went the customized, lifted golf cart, sold at a fraction of its value to a used dealership in town. Then went the designer jewelry and the ski boat. But it wasn't enough. With Richard's business suffering due to the intense local scandal and the massive financial judgments hanging over their heads, the ultimate blow finally landed. 3 months after the disastrous party, a prominent "for sale" sign was hammered into the pristine front lawn of the green estate at the end of the cul-de-sac. I was at Lot 42 that Saturday, standing on a newly laid foundation of crushed gravel, watching as my property was slowly brought back to life. The soil had been remediated, the ruts smoothed over, and a team of professional landscapers, paid for entirely by Brinley's depleted bank accounts, were planting mature native dogwood trees along the property line to replace the damaged oaks. I heard the rumble of a moving truck. I walked to the edge of my lot and watched as professional movers loaded heavy, ornate furniture out of Brinley's house. Brinley walked out the front door, carrying a small cardboard box. She wore sweatpants, a faded t-shirt, and zero makeup. The heavy federal ankle monitor strapped to her leg was clearly visible, a permanent reminder of her probation. She looked exhausted, broken, and entirely defeated. She paused by the open trunk of her sensible, downsized sedan and looked down the street. Her eyes met mine. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I simply stood on my restored property, holding my machete, existing as the immovable object that her unstoppable entitlement had finally shattered against. She broke eye contact first, her shoulders slumping as she climbed into the passenger seat. The car drove away, leaving Oakhaven Estates forever. A month later, Richard officially filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and the complete destruction of their shared finances. Helen, the retired school teacher who lived next door to me, was reluctantly elected as the new HOA president. Her first official act was to pass an ironclad bylaw strictly prohibiting the HOA board from ever accessing, regulating, or utilizing privately owned, undeveloped lots without the express, notarized written consent of the owner. "We learned our lesson, Ahmed," Helen told me one afternoon over the fence, handing me a plate of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. "Oh, nobody is ever going to bother you again." She was right. For the next 6 months, I didn't receive a single citation, a single clipboard-wielding visit, or a single complaint. By the following spring, the heavy machinery returned to Lot 42, but this time it was at my invitation. I hired a local, reputable contractor, and over the course of the summer, my vision finally took shape. A beautiful, modest log cabin rose from the earth, featuring a wraparound porch that offered an unobstructed, breathtaking view of Lake Cheddar. I sat in a wooden rocking chair on that porch on a crisp October evening. My Federal pursuit vehicle was parked legally in my new, secure driveway. The classified files were locked safely inside the cabin. A fire crackled gently in the stone fire pit near the water's edge. There were no electric golf carts whining in the distance. There were no pounding bus drops from a DJ booth. There were no entitled tyrants trying to dictate the terms of my existence. There was only the absolute, unvarnished beauty of silence and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when you push a man who has spent his entire life hunting monsters, you shouldn't be surprised when he finally decides to bite back. If you enjoyed this story of extreme entitlement meeting absolute federal authority, make sure you hit that like button. It really helps push these crazy real-life stories to more people who love a satisfying dose of instant karma. Don't forget to share this with your friends who have their own HOA nightmare stories, and smash that subscribe button for more weekly tales of petty tyrants getting exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you found a massive party on your private land? Thanks for watching, and stay out of the drama.